This podcast is brought to you by Shift Management's Supervisory Leadership Certificate course, where online learning and live web coaching bring out the very best in frontline and middle managers. Move from operations to management thinking and develop the skills for leadership, reaching your company goals at the same time. Check out our Supervisory Leadership Certificate course on the shiftworkplace.com website today. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Culture and Leadership Connections podcast. It is my honor today to interview Lyndelle Palmer-Clarke, who is the founder of Dailygreatness and who has created a paper planner that I swear by that has really made a difference in my business and my life. And I am very excited to be able to interview her today. Welcome, Lyndelle.
Hi, Marie. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm going to explain a little bit about your bio and then afterwards ask you some questions. So Lyndelle describes herself as being a self-help junkie and researcher for more than a decade who emerged out of the entertainment industry and then decided where was she going with her life, and was it really in the entertainment industry that she wanted to dedicate her purpose and her efforts. She noticed an obvious gap in the market for practical tools to apply self-help concepts. There was lots of information out there, but nothing that would provide a proper structure. So Lyndelle pioneered a practical self-help category and founded a global publishing company to create mindset, personal growth, and productivity tools for individuals and companies. It's based on positive psychology and tried and tested mindset strategies. 8 years later, Dailygreatness is incorporated into 5 countries and ships to 130. Her products have received thousands of 5-star reviews from customers all over the world and are used and recommended by CEOs, entrepreneurs, life and business coaches, psychologists, parents, and yogis. Lyndelle is an expert at embracing uncertainty and adversity, and through her products and coaching, she helps clients turn the sour into the sweet to transform their life and explode their business. Wow! It just makes you sound like a candy.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for that lovely bio, and I think it really encapsulates a lot of wonderful things about you, and I'm wondering if you can tell the audience a little bit more about who you are and what you do. Give us a little bit of backstory.
Sure. So I'm an Aussie, East Coast of Australia currently. I'm married to my wonderful husband who's Swedish, and I've been living up until a year ago, was living in Sweden for about 9 years. And I have 2 beautiful children, 5 and 2. And I'm an author of self-help and personal development and productivity journals and planners that really, as you've mentioned, Marie, help people apply self-help concepts into their life in a very practical way. And I'm just really honored to be here, and I look forward to our conversation today.
I really love that you take a practical approach to the large questions of life, like what am I doing here? How should I contribute to the world? And then how can we do this practically so that people can actually make it happen? I love that.
Yeah, it's really important to apply things from a practical sense. We're all guilty of it. You know, we've all read so many books, particularly those of us on the personal development or professional development journey. We're always devouring, whether it's podcasts or books or going to seminars. And there's a lot of amazing information out there, no doubt. But unless we're applying that into our life in a very practical way, it's very obvious that a year later, no matter how many books we've read or seminars we've been to or podcasts we listen to, unless we're applying it, nothing will change in our lives. So that practical element of applying it day over day, and essentially what we're doing is rewiring our brain. We're rewiring our DNA at a very base level to change our thinking habits, to change our behaviors and our actions, and therefore our results.
Mm-hmm. So could you share a couple of incidents from your childhood that you think made you into the person you are today?
It's a great question, Marie. And I think, there's one incident that comes to mind that I've actually never shared before, but it's a memory that came back to me as an adult and really had a lot more context to me as an adult as I looked back at this event when I was 6. So I received a bike for Christmas from my parents, and it was either a week or so after Christmas, and I hadn't learned to ride a bike yet. But I decided, as a 6-year-old, I took my bike to the top of the hill that we lived on, and I pointed it down the hill, and I pushed myself off, and halfway down I realized I didn't know how to put the brakes on. Basically realized that the only way off was to crash. So I crashed into the pavement, did a commando roll over the handlebars and into my neighbor's yard, and landed on a rock or sort of boulder that was in their front yard, and probably very narrowly escaped from a much worse fate, I would say. My neighbor walked me back home, and, my parents, were obviously shocked when they saw me bruised and scratched and crying. And that just seemed like an innocent, childhood incident. But as I reflected on it as an adult, which I have done a lot of looking back to my childhood, because I really believe that all of our life lessons are actually very evident by the time we're around 8. The life lessons are all set up for us, and they start to show in the incidents and experiences in our life. And what was really evident to me as I reflected back was ambition is not enough. We need to develop the skills. And most importantly, we need a foundation. We need to really have that foundation. As my bio and story says, that was really missing in my life, that real foundation, which is something that I've really sought to look for and to create in my life. So I think that's been a really interesting understanding. And that keeps me very humble in my life now, just understanding that, yes, you might have a big ambition, but make sure you have your foundation down first.
You also fell into a support network because your neighbor was there and walked you home, and your parents were worried about you and concerned when you hurt yourself. How did that affect that whole bicycle incident?
It's an interesting reflection. It's not something that I consider as a network. And I guess that's, this is the way in which we frame the world. This is the way in which we see the world and perceive the world. So from my viewpoint, I guess as a 6-year-old child, I wasn't obviously focused. And even as an adult, as I reflected back, it was more about that 6-year-old and what was going on inside my head versus considering the network. So it's an interesting reflection, something I might have to consider a little bit more, Marie, I think.
Yeah, because there's a lot of hidden messages in the childhood incidents that when we dig in deeper, we find other things that we might have missed the first time or second time or third time around.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So that was when you were a young child. You were 6. Anything else that you feel helped to develop your character that was an incident maybe when you were a teen or when you were a young adult?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a big defining event in my life was going to boarding school. So at 12, my parents lived on a boat, and my father had gone to boarding school, and I was very much wanting to pursue life as a singer and as a performer at this stage. And so where I lived, there wasn't really a lot of opportunity for someone who wanted to pursue that. And so I was excited to moved to Brisbane, which was a big city near where we lived. And as my parents went on their boat, I moved to Brisbane to the boarding school. And that was where I was for the whole of my secondary or high school from the age of 13 to 17. And so I think the experience of boarding school, some people really thrive in that environment. It certainly wasn't a bad experience for me. I would not send my children to boarding school. There's obviously no need to do that. But I think for me, it makes you become very independent very, very early. You also obviously, build up a lot of resilience and resourcefulness very, very quickly. And so I think that was a defining and big turning point for me. And I was also exposed to a lot of different cultures, if you like. There was international students from all over the world. And that was a very different situation that I found myself in previously, where I originally was from. There was not a lot of different cultures or different people from different backgrounds. So that was my first introduction to really meeting and being around and really starting to understand and become a lot more worldly from quite a young age.
Yeah, and seeing yourself as part of an international community.
Absolutely, yes.
Mm-hmm. So those are great. Not that many people that I interview have been to a boarding school before, unless they've been in residential schools, which was a completely different and very negative experience. But I think it's interesting that you talk about that as being something that helped you develop independence and also to see yourself as being within a much broader context than you were before. Did I get that correct?
Yes, no, absolutely. And I think, again, it's something that as an adult I reflect back on now. It's a pretty jarring experience as a child. So it's exciting at first. For the first maybe year, it's an exciting experience. as time goes on, there's definitely a shift that goes with going and leaving your biological family and living in an arrangement where you are surrounded by, well, it's teachers essentially and all these other girls who become your sisters. So it does become a jarring experience, and there's a real transformation that occurred in me throughout that experience. And I think really, as I reflected back, also, it was a similar experience when I left Australia and went to overseas. And I really had that very transformational experience where I decided I was leaving the entertainment industry and wanted to do something different. It was a similar experience. Whenever we, and I love to, talk about the hero's journey, it's really going on that journey, going on that call. And then through that experience, there's obviously a transformation that occurred. And that definitely happened for me and all of the other girls that I was there with. We were all, dealing with it in different ways based on our personality and our ability to cope. And so it was definitely a very, very big part of my growth as a person and who I am today.
Mm-hmm. Are you still in contact with any of those sisterhood girls?
I am. Yes, absolutely.
So from the groups you were born into, because everybody's born into a context, there's the national context, there's the racial context, there's the language context, there's the historical context that we're born into. Like, there are so many of them. From the groups that you were born into, what would you say has most influenced your sense of culture and self?
Yeah, so I think there's not a lot of cultural pulls or pushes where I grew up. So really my ancestors were pioneers who first settled in this particular area where I'm back living now and where I grew up in. And they were also pioneers of the fishing industry. So they were, some of the first fishing outfits here in Australia in different areas. And so there was always very much that entrepreneurial spirit and that pioneering spirit. I mean, most ancestors in Australia were pioneers to some extent. Others obviously were leaders in their communities. Others were pioneering industries, as mine were in the fishing industry. And so I think hearing those stories, my father and his father were very, very much involved in that and very proud of their family history. And so we heard a lot about that, and it's been a big part and focal point of our family. And so I think that pioneering spirit, that entrepreneurial spirit, has definitely created the foundations of who I am, obviously coupled with my personality as well. But it's just been a natural evolution, I think, of really hearing the stories of these pioneering stories, and also the women. It wasn't just the men who were out fishing. It was my grandmother and my great-grandmother and their mother, who were really the pioneering women who were doing it tough, and they were getting in there just as much as the men were to make this work. And so those stories has absolutely contributed to the person that I am today. And I think the other group is, my mother's side. They were really very religious people. And so that interest in religion and that interest in the bigger questions in life was really what piqued my curiosity at a young age on wanting to ask those questions and on wanting to seek to find my path and my answers in life and not just settle for what their beliefs were. And so I really went on that journey to find my beliefs and what felt right for me. But it was the introduction through the fact that they were so religious, and that was really what they were all about. I gave me that foundation. So I think the spiritual aspect of my life and wanting to reach more of my potential and my interest in human potential really came from that. And then the entrepreneurial, pioneering side really came from my father's side.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking of a couple of other connections too. So from the religion that your grandmother and your mother belonged to, did I get that correct?
That's correct, yes.
So was it Christian?
So they're Jehovah's Witnesses.
Jehovah's Witnesses, okay.
Yes. And so, obviously there's a bigger conversation around that. My mother is not a Jehovah's Witness. So she left the religion when she married my dad. So, there's a whole conversation around that as well, but probably not relevant to this conversation.
Actually, very relevant, because Jehovah's Witnesses is a very specific cultural group. And, and it's entirely under the umbrella of religion, but religion and culture are so intimately connected. If your mother chose to leave that very close-knit group to marry your father, that would certainly have affected you. And then
It absolutely does, yes.
right. And then what did she do for her belief system? If she was no longer part of the community of Jehovah's Witnesses, then what did she do?
It's a great question. And I think she never really left the belief that there was a higher purpose to life. She does believe in God, and that never left her. And I think that was her foundation. But I think anybody that leaves a religious group, and I think that was my experience as well, has questions, and I think that's really what it is to be a seeker. And I think there's a period of time where you actually go through what I would probably call a confused stage about what you actually believe and what is actually true. And I think for my mother, I can't speak for her, of course, but it was a very big event. If you leave a cultural group, as you pointed out, Marie, it's not just a religion, it's a whole group, and particularly that group.
It's your whole support network.
Exactly. It's everybody you know, and the way in which Jehovah's Witnesses actually, it's called disfellowship. So it's a very big thing that happens when you leave that group. There's a lot of shame.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of guilt. You're shunned. I'm unsure of whether that still takes place today because I don't ask those questions and I'm not around that group so much. But back at that time, it was very much how they did it. And so, yes, there's a lot of shame. There's a lot of guilt. And then you're cast out and you're basically outside the group. You have to start again, in so many ways. And so I think it was very courageous of my mum to choose that route. I'm grateful that she did that because I believe it gave my family the ability to have our own beliefs and our own choices in life, which wouldn't have been available to me had we have continued on in a religion per se. So I'm very, very grateful to her for that. It's allowed me to be a free thinker. And so as I speak this out, almost like a therapy session, I do see that, it really was a courageous move on my mum's part to do that. Probably not a conscious choice,
Maybe.
Yeah. But I would say it was more unconscious. But I am forever grateful to her because it's allowed us to have that ability for free thought, to be free thinkers, and to go out into the world and find answers without these answers being imposed on me. And I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, it shows an independence of spirit. Like when you said the word seeker, I think that that's really important, So she's thinking, and she probably had no idea what it would be like to be cast out from the community, or she would have maybe thought twice about it. But she certainly, or maybe she did know a little bit, but not to the extent of you experiencing it yourself. But she did make that decision that took, like you said, it took courage and independence of thought, and it took thinking, how should I seek the truth, rather than what is the tradition and how can I just be a part of that tradition, which is a completely different mindset.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then from your father's side, there's the fishing community. So he was an entrepreneur, but it was specifically related to fishing and life around fish and fish in the ocean, right? That's a whole piece about culture too. And when people live on the ocean, or they live in the mountainous areas, or live in the prairies, or living on an island is a culture, and being intimately connected with the grandeur and power of the ocean around you, I think it's got to affect you.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes,
And
no, it's beautifully put.
so there might have been things that you chose to belong to as you're growing up, obviously, because you made a lot of your own decisions and you've lived in different places and you've thought things through. You chose to belong to, for example, the self-help community, or to different spiritual communities, probably the publishing community, there was the entertainment industry. Is there anything from those groups that you think you've adopted into your leadership style, or your sense of who you are culturally, who you belong with?
There has been many groups, and I think, at each stage of my evolution, or whatever my focus was at that time, there's been groups around, yes, the entertainment industry and the spiritual community, personal development community, absolutely. But I also think that as we go on our journey and really go inward on that personal development journey, if that's, for me personally, this has been my experience, what I've noticed is a real move away from groups as such. And for a long time, what was really important to me was to be very much alone. And I found myself, when I met my husband and moved to Sweden and we started the business, there was no real group that I was around for quite a long time. And I was a solo, more or less, acting like a solo entrepreneur, building my business. And I think that was a very necessary period in my life. What was really happening was an identity transformation. I was moving and shifting from my previous employment and previous vocation, previous passion, and all of the groups connected to that, and my mindset and identity and how people knew me at that time. And there needed to be a very clear break so that I could recalibrate and really understand, who am I going to be now as I create and this business, and as I become a personal development author, essentially, which was a very big shift for me to make, because the questions come up: who are you to do this? Who am I to all of a sudden think that I'm going to create this series of personal development tools? And who am I to think that I can create a publishing company? And so those were all the questions that I had to overcome, and all those limiting beliefs that I had to overcome. And it was really something that I needed to do in solitude, and I pretty much did for many years. And it hasn't really been until the last few years that I've really felt like I've needed to find my tribe again, and find my groups and people who were, where I had now landed, if you like. And so I had, up until a few years ago, I was very content being on my own, and I'd more or less left my old groups behind to create this identity shift that I felt was required, because I couldn't create this new part of my life while I was still identified with my old groups.
It's the same journey your mother took.
Yes.
Only more scaled up into the development of the business.
It's interesting that you find that connection. I think my mum was not doing it consciously, whereas mine was a very conscious choice. And perhaps my mum laid that foundation for me. And so that
How do you know she wasn't doing it consciously?
I think I've had conversations with her. Mm-hmm. I don't get the sense that it was a conscious choice.
Mm-hmm. Did she leave because she was dissatisfied, or did she leave for love?
I think she left for love and adventure. Yeah, but I don't believe it was a conscious choice. I think it fell upon her and she needed to take it. And so my mum's not typically a risk taker. And so I think life thrust this upon her, as I believe life does, as we need these lessons to grow and to evolve. And so I think she had a situation that was put in her way, and she didn't have any other choice, actually.
So because you really have upset your life. First off, the boarding school was a big upset. And then afterwards, moving to London was a big upset. And then moving to Sweden and starting your business is a big upset. Is that because of love and adventure, or was it because of seeking?
I love that you're framing all of these as a disruption. And I think we need to disrupt our lives. I've talked about that before. We need to disrupt our lives. We need to disrupt our thinking, because it's the only way that we can create change that actually sticks. If we stay too firmly rooted in any particular situation for too long, it becomes more and more difficult to disrupt and to grow in our lives, because our structures become like a prison. I was in my 20s and early 30s, and so I was a seeker, and I've always been a traveler. So I was not afraid to take off on an adventure and find out. There was a belief, I think, in the back of my mind that there's more to life, that I have more to give, but I knew that I needed to really understand a lot more about life in general. I was just so green, and I just felt like if I'm really going to give anything and I'm really going to be of service in the world, firstly, I need to heal my own life, and I need to understand what this life is really about and how to navigate the system, if you like. And so that was really what drove me to, be willing to move to London. Didn't know I was going to marry my husband at the time, but be willing to move to Sweden to find out. And so that seeking and that looking and that willingness to find out if there's more to life was really what was driving me. And it was really quite conscious, because I'd been on this personal development journey for a while, but I was willing to go out of my comfort zone to really find out.
Then you established a structure that is portable comfort. Your planner is like, it's a structure in a world that can be and is constantly disrupted, but you can take it with you. It's a structure that you can use to create a sense of comfort and security around you, and also to probe and provoke you to move to new decisions and to new places in your life.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And as I said that, the structure, I actually thought of the planners. And I guess really what structure gives us. Structure is obviously not a bad thing. It's a very, very good thing. And when we have our foundation, when we have our structure, whether that's for a range of reasons, whether it's for health, whether it's for our family life, whether it's for our professional life, when that foundation is down, it gives us the ability to really go out and do all of the different crazy, creative, wild things that we might want to do, while being able to have this structure that helps us to manage our life in a way. Because without that structure, and that was what was missing from my life, I was out there doing all this crazy stuff, moving countries, doing this, in the entertainment industry. We can fool ourselves almost, or I was certainly doing this, fooling myself to believe that I was somehow making progress. But what was missing was that foundation, my mindset, and my ability to actually turn experiences into lasting wisdom, first of all, which is what a mindfulness practice can help you do. It gives you that foundation to really lean on in times of challenges and in times of hardship when they come, and they always do. Look where we are now. And that's why structure right now has never been more important, to really help us lean on something to get us through what is a very stressful and uncertain time. But it allows us to then to be creative and to be unstructured in other areas of our life. And that's how I like to think of structure. Not that it restrains us, but it allows us to be even more creative and go out there and actually create progress, and not just, experiences that don't actually lead anywhere or that we don't actually grow from.
Yeah, this structure is freeing in many ways. Like, think of Picasso in his pink period, which he did for several years, or blue period, where he just only painted with pink. And he just did the same thing with blue afterwards. And it's just, he felt that was necessary for all of his creative development that came afterwards. Yeah.
I had not heard that. That's intriguing. I wonder if it was some sort of color therapy for him.
Interestingly, maybe, because, pink is a healing color, right? So it's kind of interesting. I have to delve into that some more, but let's get back to you. So for your temperament and your personality, right? Temperament you're born with. Personality is how you cope with the stuff that happens to you and what you then becomes a habit. So how has your temperament affected who you are, would you say?
I'm an Aries, so I'm naturally a leader. There's obviously good and bad to Aries traits. And I think though we evolve, so I'm a big believer that we come in with a certain temperament around a persona, if you like, or an archetype. We're all archetypes. And so we have a certain way about us. Leadership is definitely something that comes natural to me. But what I have seen about myself and about the traits of an Aries, if you like, typically it is the ram. And so it's impatient, it's stubborn, and all of those things. And I've seen myself, of course, with all of those traits. I'm an absolute Aries down to the ground. But as I've evolved, those traits also evolve. So while I still have remnants of those traits, they definitely have evolved. So instead of being stubborn, I now see that as determined. And it's definitely had a shift in how it presents in my life. I also think around impatience, I've actually, because I have been impatient and I've seen the effects of being impatient as I've matured, and particularly as a parent, you have no choice but to be patient. And so I think all of those traits that we're born with all have the potential to really evolve into a more mature and a more grounded version of who we're becoming.
It's taking what you've got and then growing within that to be more wise and more mature, and to know yourself better and to respond more appropriately to things as they come up.
Absolutely. And I think that's been a really key part of my temperament. I've always been a seeker, from a very young age. And I think that's just something that's innate in some of us and not so much in others. And also personal development has been a very high priority in my life. My growth has not always been evident in my life. I think it's been something that I've always worked towards, and I haven't been willing to give up just because I failed or just because it didn't go that way. So I think, my personality and temperament is very much somebody who is always looking to fulfill more of my potential. And as a leader in my business, and we have a remote team of 6, 8 sometimes 12 people, depending on the time of year, across 6 or 7 different countries. I think, my temperament as a person has, as my team has grown and as I've needed to not only focus on me and my growth as a person, because I'm a strong believer that your business can only grow as much as you do. And so that's been a big focus for me, because it used to be just I wanted to grow as a person. Now it was my business growth depends on me growing as a person. And then it becomes about, obviously my family and also the team who is, working alongside me in the business, and how I can, obviously apply more patience when I'm training them, when we're growing as a company, and to get them coming along on the vision. So I think leadership is a natural trait of mine, and so I naturally step into that. But that doesn't mean that you're naturally a great communicator, or that you can communicate your vision and get people to buy into your vision and purpose of your business. So that's been a real challenge for me to understand, okay, now I need to actually lead a team of people, and I need to communicate well. So that's the shift from a solo entrepreneur where you're wearing all hats, where you're doing all things, and then needing to let go and delegate as the business has grown, to really allow other people to come in and have influence, and also be able to bring their skill sets and their talent and their goals in life into your business. And so there's a letting go. And I think that's been a really interesting journey for me that I'm still going on, because it's very important that I don't hold the potential of our business back, which is very easy to do when it's your baby. It's your baby and you want to hold on to it. And so it's a real letting go. And so that, I think, has been probably my biggest challenge. It's not something that's come easy to me, I would say. It's something I've had to very consciously work at, to allow that to really unfold and allow my business to go where it wants to go.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. So I'm wondering, you have probably experienced this quite a few times, but a time when you became aware when your cultural understanding, the way you see the world, was suddenly juxtaposed against somebody else's. I imagine when you went to boarding school, that would have happened on a regular basis, going to London, going to Sweden. But there would have been other times too. Is there a time that you can think of that has an incident that you could explain where you felt like, oh, wait a minute, the way I see the world is just me. It's not the way everybody sees the world.
Yeah, there's probably 2 times in my life. I wouldn't necessarily say I have specific incidents, but what comes to mind is it wasn't at a young age. I think I didn't have that self-awareness at a young age. So it wasn't something that occurred to me. I think the biggest shock was probably when I left Australia. I'd moved to London. I'd gone through my very, challenging time where I'd hit rock bottom, and I'd decided to leave the entertainment industry and move into personal development. And I really immersed myself in all of that world for many, many years over that time, over that period. And I think what comes to mind that probably shocked me the most is when I had really made that shift, and then I started to have conversations again around previous groups or people that I used to be very close with. It became very obvious that we had very different worldviews. And so it became more challenging to find the common ground with people. And so I think any personal transformation that you go through, all of a sudden there's going to be a distinct gap between the person that people used to see you as or know you as and the person you are now, and what you're willing to talk about or where you're willing to go or the conversations that you want to have are vastly different to perhaps what you used to have with those same people. And so then there's a clash. And so it's challenging and it's difficult. And there's a time, and I think that's another period of growth where we have to really accept that, we'll have to agree to disagree, and that's okay. We can still be in relationship, even though we may not agree on certain viewpoints or how we view the world. Because if other people aren't going on that same journey, that personal growth journey, your worldview is vastly different to theirs. And that was my experience. So I think it was really mostly with family. We grew up with certain belief systems within our family and how the world was viewed. It could be around work or politics. It could be around just how the language that was used and the way in which we communicated as a family. And then to really go out and really what it is individuation. When we individuate from our parents and from our cultural upbringing and move away from our biological family and start to create our own view and sense of the world, then that can be in a stark contrast to where you used to be. And so I think that was very jarring and quite a big shock at first. And then I realized this is normal and this is just the way it's going to be. And at first I wanted to fight back and push back and sort of put my new views onto them. But I realized that was not going to work. And so, I quickly realized that's not how it needs to be. And it's only going to create conflict. And so, there's a maturing around that as well, and understanding that there's a new way in which to be in relationship with these people.
Your experience is really typical of people who have a breadth of experience meeting up and clashing with people who have a depth of experience in a place. And at first they feel they have nothing in common, but then the love that informs their relationship helps them find some bridges and they learn to communicate. But you have to learn to negotiate your communication all over again when you have that kind of a difference of experience, don't you think?
Yes, absolutely. And that takes a level of maturity. It's a transformation that we go through, but that doesn't necessarily mean we have the maturity to deal with the effects of how that affects our relationships.
It's always easy to say this afterwards. In the moment,
absolutely,
just go through it, right?
That's right. That's right. It's always easy in hindsight.
Sorry, you were going to say something else, and I just jumped in there.
That's okay. No, the other it's more recent, I think, as a business coach. So I coach entrepreneurs, business owners around the concepts of daily greatness and building a business and scaling businesses and how to create a passion business. And I think what's most interesting to me, because I come from that, and that's now it's just how I am in life, creating a life from that place of purpose and from a place of personal development. And so I'm always, I wouldn't say shocked, but I find it interesting that people are not, because I see that as my culture and that is just how I see life now, and that's my norm. When I meet other business owners who don't put any value or understand the importance of personal development and self-awareness for being able to see their blind spots, and that's really what's holding them back, I find that interesting. And obviously that's my job as a coach, to help them see their blind spots and to really help them to unpack the challenges, and so that they can make the connections and join the dots and then hopefully find the answers themselves. I guess for me, that's always interesting when particularly people have achieved a level of success in their life. I'm always intrigued about how they did it, and yet there's some obvious foundation missing. They're not doing personal development work as such. They're not prioritizing anything around productivity or transparency on their goals or purpose, etc. So I think that's something that's also been interesting to me. Not everybody comes from that space, but that just tells me how much potential they have to grow. So I think that's something that's really come up more recently for me when I'm talking to my coaching clients and really peeking inside the mind and business of some of these people that I work with.
Have you read Adam Grant's book, Give and Take?
I haven't, no.
It's a really interesting way to understand how people can be successful in their lives with self-awareness and with no self-awareness, with being generous and with being stingy, and how to understand both the psychology and the sociology of that. It's very insightful. It's one of my favorite books. He's written a lot of really good books, but yeah, it's
great.
It's called Give and Take. Yeah, really, really could be helpful. I'm always, looking for new insights. Adam Grant and James Clear with his Atomic Habits, of course.
Yes, great book.
That's a great one to go with your daily planner. We're almost at the end of the interview, and I wanted to ask you, you're in a position right now where you're hiring people and people are working with you and you're working with them. What would you say to them about what's the best way to work with you?
I think not making assumptions, but asking questions is always valuable. It really comes back to, I want to be treated how I want to treat others and be treated in the same way. And so for me, I think the three things that I really try to do for my team, and that I really expect that to be reciprocated, and that really is like, ask questions first, don't make assumptions. I think making people feel appreciated and heard. Sometimes work can feel transactional, And so we need to make it feel more human. And with a remote team, whether we're talking in Slack or other communication tools, obviously it's a little different now because most of us are Zooming, with video calls, and I think that's great. But it can feel transactional. And so making it more human and making people feel appreciated and heard. And I think looking for the good in people and their work and giving them kudos for that. And I think sometimes as a leader, it can be lonely. A leader in your business, it often doesn't come from your team, and it shouldn't either. Your team is your team. But I think if the team is functioning really effectively and really well, I think there's no matter, who is leading or who is, considered a team member, I think the free flow of communication should just be, very much across the team and in any which way.
Dialogues, conversations.
Yes, dialogues, conversations, and not having that hierarchy as such. And I think that's really what needs to be built into the culture, though, because if it's not there, then people are going to feel like it's not my place to say that, or it's not my place to do that. And so that's the challenge, and it's not an easy one. I think that's, definitely something that we talk about as a personal development company. In our culture, in our business is very, very important because we need to be walking our talk as a business in personal development. And so I think really how people should be communicating to me is exactly how I communicate to them. And I need to lead with that. So that's really how I show up in my business as a leader. And and obviously you can't make people do something that they don't feel comfortable to do, but you can absolutely show by example. And that's really what I seek to do as a leader in my business.
Anything else you'd like to say before we end with some promotional notes?
I've just loved this conversation and these excellent questions, Marie. They're very insightful and very unique and original questions, I must say. So thank you so much for a very inspiring and insightful, almost therapy session. I've really enjoyed it.
People often tell me that doing the interview for the Culture and Leadership Connections podcast is cathartic for them.
Yeah, I think I need to go and have a sleep. I need to rest and think.
Well, I hope you didn't have to work too hard, but it was really wonderful, the things that you had to say and the insights that you had. And I consider it such an honor to have had a glimpse inside of your own journey.
Thank you so much, Marie.
And I'm wondering if you would like to leave us with something you're interested in promoting or a place you would like people to look for where they can connect with you.
Yeah, sure. So you can find Dailygreatness on dailygreatness.com. And then you would click through to your region. And I'm online also. You can find me at Lyndelle on Instagram or lyndellepalmerclarke.com.
Awesome. And we will have all of those things in the show notes so that people can find you easily. So thank you again so much for being a part of the podcast and being part of the Culture and Leadership Podcast family. Hey, you're an inducted member now.
I'm very privileged. Thank you.
From boarding school and fishing boats to working around the world in the entertainment industry, Lyndelle Palmer-Clarke has lived a life filled with cultural learning. Her leadership calling became focused and refined after hitting a personal and career low. As she reconciled her religious upbringing with her own personal spiritual quest and began the journey of her own development, Lyndelle found her passion and created the Dailygreatness planners, coaching, fitness videos, and podcast as a result. I hope you enjoyed Lyndelle's entrepreneurship and personal story, and that you will share her episode with anyone you think would be inspired by it. I am a big fan of Lyndelle's Dailygreatness planner and have used it for several years. You can find a link to her marvelous planner on our shiftworkplace.com website under Toolkits. Thank you for listening, and may culture and leadership connections continue to guide and inspire your day. This podcast would not be possible without the expertise of our Culture and Leadership Connections production team. A big thank you and shout out to Mike Kurlander for audio production and editing, to Malvika Kathpal for the show notes, Bernadette Guadiz for online web and social media management and promotions, Celine Bayogo for design, and Kirsten Hoyer for website and branding. Thank you so much. Hey, Culture and Leadership Connections podcast listeners. Do you love these insightful and moving interviews published twice monthly for your listening pleasure? You may not know that it costs between $300 and $500 per month to pay for our podcast episodes. Shocking, but true. Well, now you can help support this podcast by showing your love with a little skin in the game real money on the Patreon website. For as little as $5 or as much as $50 a month, you can contribute to keep culture and leadership connections alive and healthy. Your donation is invaluable in helping us connect the hearts and minds of people across cultures and professions for happier and more humane workplaces. I know you will call on your inner generosity, knowing that your contribution is a practical demonstration of love and support. Check out the patreon.com/culture and leadership connections page to see what subscription level feels right for you and find out about the special loyalty perks at each patron level. That's spelled Patreon, patreon.com/culture and leadership connections. Thank you for your generosity.